The gravy was still steaming when my mother smiled at me across the holiday table and said the estate was finally gone. "We closed on your grandmother's cottage last month," she said, swirling her wine. "You were never in the will anyway." My sister laughed into her linen napkin. Good. She would have just wasted it on that dusty little office of hers. 11 faces turned to watch me crumble. I didn't. None of them knew that the deed to that timber cottage already had a name on it, sitting in my leather purse, right beside my chair. And in about 90 seconds, that name was going to turn this noisy dining room into the quietest space in the county. Welcome back to their secret stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and answer with quiet steel instead of screaming. If a story has ever made you set down your coffee and whisper, good for her. You're in the right place. My name is Elena Ross. I'm 34, and I keep the books for the local growers and businesses around Hawthorne Glen. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is, and be sure to subscribe. To explain how I ended up at that table holding a deed, I have to go back almost a year. It was a freezing Tuesday in February, and I was reconciling the winter ledgers for the Linden Creek vineyard when the call came. My grandmother Ida had taken a turn for the worse in the night. I was the one they called. I was always the one they called. Not my mother, Beatrice, who lived 20 minutes across town, and not my sister Vanessa, who lived even closer me. Because for 8 years, I had been the one driving out to the cottage on Ridgeview Lane with her prescription bottles, her tax forms, her groceries, and a hot thermos of coffee for the long mornings. I closed my laptop, left a quick note on my office door, and drove out past the frozen, quiet fields. Ida was propped up in her bed when I arrived, looking smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. She held my hand for a long time without speaking. Then she reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pressed a small, delicate key into my palm. It was the key to an old copper tea tin she'd kept on her kitchen shelf since before I was born. "When the time comes," she whispered, "you'll know where to look." I asked her what she meant, but she just patted my hand and told me to drink my coffee before it went cold. I tucked the key into my coat pocket and didn't think much of it. I assumed she was just tired, talking the way old people do when the medicine softens the edges of the world. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that year, but I wouldn't understand any of it until the house was already sold. That timber cottage was the only place I ever felt like I truly belonged. I grew up in town, in my parents' rigid, immaculate ranch house, where every single dinner conversation felt like an annual performance review. But during the summers, I belonged to Ida. She taught me how to harvest wild berries on the back porch and how to read a bulk fertilizer invoice so the local distributors couldn't pad the bill. She would spread the estate's receipts across the wooden kitchen table and let me add up the columns out loud. "Numbers don't lie, Elena," she would say. "People do. So you learn the numbers." That kitchen was where I decided what I wanted to be. I opened Ross Financial Ledgering at 20, in a rented room above the corner bakery. My parents wouldn't help me with college tuition, but Ida quietly slipped me her jar savings to help cover my first few months of rent. My mother thought bookkeeping was beneath us. My sister thought it was incredibly boring. Ida thought it was the finest, most independent thing anyone in this family had ever done. While I was driving out to that cottage every week, my mother visited, maybe twice a year, mostly to ask about the market value of the acreage. Vanessa only showed up for holidays and always left early. I'm not telling you this to sound like a martyr. I'm telling you because of something Ida said during our last good autumn together, sitting in her blueberry patch with damp soil under our fingernails. She looked up at the cottage, then at me, and spoke plainly. "This place goes to the one who stayed." I laughed it off, telling her not to talk like that she had plenty of years left. She didn't argue. She just smiled the way she always did when she knew something I didn't, and went back to her plants. I should have asked her what she meant, but I didn't. I thought we had time. Ida passed away in her sleep just 3 days after she gave me that key. The funeral was held on a gray, drizzling Saturday, and I planned every single detail of it. I selected the hymns she loved, ordered the arrangements, wrote the obituary, and stood by the door thanking neighbors who had known her for 40 years. My mother, Beatrice, wore dramatic black and accepted condolences like a queen receiving her subjects. My father, Thomas, stood beside her and said absolutely nothing, which was his entire personality. Vanessa spent the post-funeral reception staring at her phone. I noticed, because you notice everything when grief makes the world too loud and too quiet at the same time. But what I remember most from that day isn't the sorrow. It was the math. At the reception, before the potato soup had even gone cold, my mother leaned in and asked me what I thought the cottage and the surrounding land would fetch on the market. I thought I had misheard her. Then I saw Vanessa drifting through the rooms with her phone camera raised, photographing the cherrywood wardrobe, the silver tea set, and the antique clock, whispering estimated prices under her breath like she was cataloging an estate sale. "That clock is worth thousands," she muttered. "And the land, Mom. The acreage is where the real money is." My father just examined his shoes. Nobody asked who would take care of Ida's old spaniel, Toby. Nobody asked where her gardening tools should go. They only asked what it was all worth. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, right by the copper tea tin she'd told me about, and felt a cold, heavy weight settle in my chest. I told myself it was just grief. I told myself families get strange when someone dies, and that they didn't really mean it the way it sounded. I thought the hardest part of the year was already behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part hadn't even started yet. It started with a phone call about a will. In April, my cousin Clint Hensley called a family meeting to read the document. Clint is on my mother's side, a part-time notary who operates a sketchy auto, tag and title shop 2 towns over, and he always smells faintly of cheap cologne and stale cigarette smoke. The meeting wasn't held in a professional law office. It was at my parents' kitchen table, complete with a spiced pear tart and a manila folder. That should have been my very first clue. Clint put on his reading glasses and announced that Ida had left everything, the cottage, the land, and the savings accounts, to my mother. "The devoted daughter, Law," he read aloud, "who walked beside me in my final seasons." My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Vanessa squeezed her hand. "My name was not in the document at all. Not as a beneficiary, not as a witness, not even as an afterthought. You were never in the will anyway, sweetheart," my mother said, and there was the faintest, cruelest curl at the corner of her mouth. I sat very still. I am exceptionally good at sitting still, but inside 2 alarms were screaming at me. The first was that "devoted daughter-in-law" was a phrase Ida would have choked on before writing. She and my mother had circled each other like territorial cats for 30 years. The second was the signature. I had seen my grandmother sign her name hundreds of times. This signature was steady, clean and perfectly aligned. The Ida I buried couldn't even hold a soup spoon during her final weeks, let alone sign her name with such precision. And the date typed at the bottom of the page said the will had been executed just 3 weeks before she passed away. 3 weeks. I didn't say any of this out loud. I thanked Clint for his time, took a slice of the tart that I didn't eat, and drove back to my office with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind doing rapid arithmetic. Here is the thing about being the family bookkeeper. People assume you only count what they hand to you. They completely forget that you also notice what is missing. That night, I sat at my desk and laid out everything I knew, the exact way Ida had taught me to lay out a ledger. 2 years earlier, I had driven her to an estate attorney's office in the county seat. She had told me she was getting her affairs in order and made me wait in the lobby, which was very typical of her. She came out an hour later with a sealed envelope and a business card that she tucked into her purse. I never saw the documents, but I knew they existed. So, how did a will drafted by a professional estate lawyer 2 years ago suddenly turn into a handwritten document, notarized by my sketchy cousin Clint just 3 weeks before her death? Wills can be updated, of course, but Ida hadn't left her house in 6 months. She couldn't have driven to Clint's shop, and Clint hadn't set foot in the timber cottage. I would have known. I called him the next morning and asked him point blank when exactly Grandma had signed this new will. He got evasive immediately. She had me come by. "Elena," he said, his voice tense. "A last-minute change of heart. It happens all the time." I asked him who had witnessed the signing. He stammered and said he'd have to check his physical files. A notary who has to search his memory to recall if anyone witnessed a major will is a notary who is lying to you. I thanked him and hung up. Then, I sat there for a long time, staring at the corner of my desk, where I keep things I can't bear to throw away. And I remembered the business card. 2 years ago, in that law office lobby, Ida had pressed a card into my hand, just in case. I had filed it away without a second thought. Sylvia Sterling, Estate Law. Before I called the lawyer, I did the reasonable thing. I decided to ask my own family for the truth. I drove over to my parents' house and asked to see the actual probate filing. The official court document, not Clint's manila folder. My mother's entire expression hardened. "Why on earth would you need to see that?" she demanded. I told her I just wanted to read through it. I keep financial records. Reading through legal documents is what I do for a living. That was when she reached for the emotional weapon she had used against me my entire life. She made herself the victim. "I cannot believe you," she said, her voice trembling with forced emotion. "Your grandmother is barely in the ground, and you are already clawing at her memory for money." Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway right on cue. "Don't make this ugly, Elena. It is so like you to make everything about yourself." My father studied the pattern on the wallpaper. I looked at the 3 of them and finally understood something I should have realized years ago. They weren't confused. They weren't grieving badly. They had a coordinated plan. And that plan required me to be quiet, ashamed, and gone. So I went quiet, but not in the way they wanted. I drove back to my office, and I did not call my mother to apologize, because for once in my life, I had absolutely nothing to apologize for. They thought they had handled me. They thought the quiet, bookish daughter would fold, because she always folded, and because keeping the peace had always been my default setting. What they forgot is what I actually do for a living. I spend my days finding the exact numbers that someone tried very hard to hide. I find them in the rounded estimates. I find them in the dates that don't line up. And there was a date that didn't line up, sitting in a suspicious will that my cousin couldn't explain. So, the next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed Sylvia Sterling. Sylvia's assistant put me through the very moment I mentioned my grandmother's name. That told me everything I needed to know before the lawyer even spoke. But Sylvia was professional and careful on the phone, the way good attorneys are, and asked me to come to her office in person and bring identification. We set the appointment for the following week. In the meantime, I gathered facts. I learned that the estate administration was already moving fast, way too fast. My mother had petitioned the court as the executor under an informal, uncontested probate, the kind of legal process that sails through quickly when nobody stands up to raise an objection. A probate court reviews a will on its face. It doesn't verify signatures unless a legitimate heir formally contests it, and no heir had done so. The required legal notice to the family had been sent to an old mailing address I had left years ago, meaning it reached me long after the easy window to object had nearly closed. Sylvia Sterling had never heard a word about any of this because nobody is legally obligated to notify the attorney who drafted a previous will. On paper, Clint's fraudulent document looked clean, and the probate had sailed through on the strength of it. And now, a public notice had been posted stating that the timber cottage and the land would be sold to settle the estate. Sold to the highest bidder. I drove out to Ridgeview Lane that evening and parked at the very edge of the long gravel driveway. The cottage sat there in the blue winter dusk. Ida's porch swing still hanging slightly crookedly, just as it always had. I thought about strangers walking through those historic rooms. I thought about a developer clearing out her antique lilac bushes to put in a modern pool, and I made myself a silent promise right there in the cold. Whatever the law eventually determined about that forged signature, it would take months to prove, and the cottage would be long gone by then. I couldn't halt the sale in time. But there was absolutely nothing stopping me from being the one who bought it. If you've ever had to sit in silence while your own blood tried to write you out of your own life, drop a comment with the one who stayed right now so I know you're with me. If you've ever been the one who showed up for every appointment, every medical emergency, and every lonely night, only to watch the people who vanished swoop in to collect the reward, you already know the fire that was burning in my chest. Stay with me, because what I did next surprised even me. Hit that subscribe button so the rest of this story finds you. Most people expect rage to look loud. Mine looked like a legal pad. The night I decided to buy the cottage, I sat at my kitchen table above the office and made a list, because lists are how I process the world. Down the left side, I wrote what I knew. The will was almost certainly a forgery. The sale was going through regardless. My family was already spending money they hadn't actually received yet. Down the right side, I wrote what I could control, not their terrible behavior. Not the speed of the local probate court, just my own strategic moves. Made cleanly, made legally, and made in the exact right order. My mother's mocking voice kept echoing in my head, "You were never in the will anyway." I let it ring. I didn't try to push it away. I let it sit there and temper into pure fuel, because anger that you control is anger that you can aim. Then I started researching. I read everything I could find about how estate properties are liquidated when an executor is desperate for quick cash, and I found the single word that changed the entire game auction. The estate wasn't doing a quiet, private sale to a pre-selected buyer. to move the property fast and prove to the court that they were getting fair market value. The land was headed to a public estate auction. A public auction, completely open to anyone with the funds and the nerve to raise a bidding paddle. My mother thought she was selling her mother, in-law's beloved home, to some faceless real estate investor. She had absolutely no idea that the auction floor would be open to me, too. I sat back and felt something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not peace, exactly, but a profound sense of purpose. I had a target number to find, a plan to construct, and for the first time in months. I wasn't the one being managed. I was the one doing math that nobody else even knew was happening. Sylvia Sterling's office smelled of old leather, paper, and rich coffee. She was a sharp, elegant woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a silver chain and a firm handshake. I placed my driver's license on her desk. She looked at it, then up at me, and the tension in her shoulders visibly eased. "You look exactly like her," she said softly. Then she opened a physical file that was at least 2 inches thick. She told me that 2 years ago. My grandmother had come to her office, entirely lucid and clear, headed, and drafted a final will and testament. It was signed, witnessed by 2 members of Sylvia's staff, and properly notarized. In that document, Ida left the timber cottage and the surrounding 10 acres entirely to me, to Elena, the one who stayed. As Sylvia read aloud, I had to look out the window for a moment to blink back tears. The financial accounts were split evenly among the rest of the family, but the real estate was mine, in black and white, executed the right way. Then I told Sylvia about Clint's version of the will, about the incredibly steady signature from a dying woman, the kitchen table reading, and the suspicious date. Sylvia's expression instantly went flat and professional, which is how experienced lawyers look when they are absolutely furious. "I drafted the operative will," she said coldly, "and no one ever contacted me about a revocation. A valid later will can indeed supersede an earlier one, but it has to be legally valid." She tapped the thick manila folder. "If your cousin's document is what you suspect, then the will currently in probate is a fraud, and every single action taken under it can be legally challenged." I asked her the obvious question: where was the original, signed copy of the real will? Sylvia had a certified copy in her office file, but the executed original was something Ida had insisted on keeping herself, stored in her safe deposit box at the Hawthorne Glen Bank. And accessing that box, Sylvia explained, would require the physical key and the specific bank authorization Ida had set up. A key, a box. I felt the cold memory of that small key press against my mind. The next morning, I drove out to the timber cottage one last time before it officially went on the auction block. The estate clean-up crew hadn't padlocked the doors yet. I still had the spare key Ida had given me years ago. The one to the side door that stuck if you didn't lift the handle slightly as you turned it. I let myself in, and the scent of wood smoke, old paper, and her memories hit me instantly. Everything was exactly where she had left it. I walked straight to the kitchen, to the shelf above the stove, where the copper tea tin had lived for as long as I could remember. I took the small key from my coat pocket, and it slid into the lock perfectly. Inside, tucked beneath vintage tea leaves and handwritten recipes, I found 2 things. The first was a flat brass safe deposit key in a small envelope marked in her elegant, sweeping cursive Hawthorne Glen Bank, Box 2-8. The second was a sealed envelope. My name was written on the frontie, just Elena. I stood in that silent kitchen holding both, and my hands, which are usually rock steady, began to shake. I knew what the bank key represented. The safety deposit box, the original will, the exact leverage that could shatter my family's entire lie. But the letter was different. The letter was her voice, and I wasn't entirely ready to hear it just yet. So I did something that wasn't entirely logical. I slipped the bank key into my pocket, placed the sealed letter in my purse, and carried it around with me for 3 whole days without opening it. Some truths, once you let them out of the envelope, can never be folded back up. I think a part of me knew that whatever she had written would demand courage from me, and I wanted to make sure I was strong enough to deliver before I read her final words. While I worked up the nerve to read the letter, I built the foundation of my plan. I incorporated a business, not because I wanted to be mysterious, but because I needed to bid on that cottage without my mother or sister seeing my name on the bidder sheet and intentionally driving up the price out of pure spite. So I did what countless real estate buyers do. I registered a limited liability company called Timberline Assets LLC. On all the public auction documents, only the company name would be visible. The law still required me to report myself as the true beneficial owner to the Federal Registry privately, which I did immediately because I do everything strictly by the book. But my family, scanning the public auction registrations, would only see a generic corporate entity. They would never connect it to the daughter they had completely written off. Then came the much harder part, the money. The cottage and the 10 acres had been appraised at approximately 215,000. That is not a fortune in the major cities, but it is a massive mountain of cash when you run a small accounting firm above a local bakery. However, I had been incredibly disciplined for 12 years. I had real, untouched savings in my business accounts. I also had a small trust inheritance from my grandfather that I had never accessed because Ida had told me to save it for something that truly matters. I qualified for a commercial mortgage under the LC's name to cover the remaining balance. I sat with my own financial ledgers for 2 straight nights, stress testing every single calculation the way I would never allow a client to overextend themselves. I could do it, barely, but cleanly. And there was one major factor working in my favor, a cold piece of financial reality. My mother needed cash, and she needed it immediately. This meant she would set the auction's reserve price incredibly low to guarantee a rapid transaction. A low reserve price is an open door, and I fully intended to walk right through it. Right in the middle of all this planning, Vanessa called me to gloat. She didn't think she was gloating. Of course, she thought she was just sharing exciting family news. She had just put down a non-refundable deposit on a brand new top-of-the-line luxury sports coupe. It's gorgeous, Elena, she chirped, fully loaded, custom leather interior, the works. I'm paying for it directly out of my share of Grandma's estate. The money hadn't even cleared probate yet. I asked her in a neutral tone if it was wise to make such a massive financial commitment before the property sale actually closed. And that was when she said it, breezy and careless, as if it cost her nothing at all. Oh, please. If Grandma had left any of it to you, you'd just waste it on that dusty little desk of yours anyway. There it was, the exact same sentiment my mother had used at the kitchen table. Just dressed up in a slightly different outfit, you'd just waste it. As if the 8 years I had spent driving out to that cottage, managing her care, keeping her company, and protecting her dignity at the end of her life were absolutely nothing. I felt the familiar, old urge to defend myself, to list every single pharmacy, run, and doctor's appointment just to make her understand. But I didn't. I had finally learned that you cannot explain your worth to people who have already decided you are worthless. So I simply said, "We'll see." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, as if she expected a fight and didn't know how to proceed without one. Anyway, she muttered and quickly changed the subject to interior leather options. After we hung up, I sat with my tea going cold and thought about the auction, which was now just 11 days away. I thought about Vanessa signing her name on a car loan with money that was about to become the most expensive mistake of her entire life. And for the first time in months, I let myself smile. The night before I was scheduled to meet Sylvia Sterling to open the safety deposit box, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. I brewed tea I didn't touch, sat in the armchair by the window, and carefully broke the seal. Her elegant handwriting filled 2 full pages, steady and beautiful, in stark contrast to the forged signature that had been suspiciously perfect. She wrote exactly the way she spoke, no wasted words, no dramatic flourishes. She told me she knew. She knew my mother, Beatrice, was financially underwater. She knew about the secret second mortgage on their home and the string of failed vanity business ventures. She knew that the moment she passed, greedy hands would reach for the cottage before the funeral flowers had even begun to wilt. "I've watched this storm gathering for years," she wrote. "Your mother loves the appearance of wealth the way some people love liquor, and she will construct any lie she needs to in order to get it." Then she laid out exactly what she had done. The real, legally binding will in the Hawthorne Glenbank box. The timber cottage left entirely to me in writing. And then she wrote the line that I have read so many times I can see it when I close my eyes. "If they ever dare to tell you that you were never in my will, you place this letter on the table and you let the paper speak. Do not fight them with screaming, Elena. You were never any good at it, and noise is not your strength. Numbers are your strength. Quiet is your strength. The cottage goes to the one who stayed. That is you. It was always you." One, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then the tears finally came. Not the quiet, graceful tears you see in movies, but the deep, ragged crying that happens when someone reaches out from beyond the grave to let you know that they saw you, truly saw you all along. I wiped my face, folded the letter back along its original creases, and placed it safely in my leather folder. Because now, I wasn't just attempting to buy back a piece of real estate. I was carrying out the last, crystal clear instructions of the only person who had ever truly believed in me. Let the paper speak. 2 days later, Sylvia Sterling and I stood inside the secure vault of the Hawthorne Glen Bank. Ida had anticipated this step too. Years earlier, she had quietly added me as a joint renter of Box 2 and 8, and my signature was already on file with the bank. This meant the box was never frozen upon her death, and I could legally open it without waiting for any probate court authorizations. The flat brass key was mine to use. Inside the steel box was a slim, protective folder. And inside that was the executed original of her real will, signatures, witness seals, and notary stamps completely intact, dated exactly 2 years prior. Sylvia laid it by side with a copy of Clint's forged document on the bank's small viewing table, and adjusted her reading glasses. She didn't say a word for several minutes. Then, she began pointing out the red flags, the dates, the witness signatures, which named 2 people Sylvia's staff couldn't locate in any local records, and the signature itself, which Sylvia called a careful, lifeless imitation. "I've seen forged estate documents before," Sylvia said, her voice tight. "They almost always make the same fundamental mistake. They try far too hard to look perfect. A genuine signature from an 86-year-old woman in failing health will wobble. This signature marches. She explained our legal path forward in clear, realistic terms. We could immediately file a petition to reopen the probate, present the original will, and formally allege estate fraud. If the court agreed, the forged will would be thrown out, and every single action taken under it would be voided. But she warned me that this road was slow, months, perhaps even a year, of bitter legal fighting with my family. And in the meantime, the auction would proceed on schedule, and the timber cottage would be sold. So, we fight on two fronts, I said quietly. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. I laid out my strategy. I would form the LC. Buy the cottage cleanly at the public auction to secure the physical property immediately, and then pursue the fraud case to make the legal truth land exactly where it belonged. Sylvia took off her glasses, stared at me for a long, silent moment, and a genuine smile finally broke across her face. Your grandmother, she said softly, would have absolutely loved that. The auction was held on a bitter, freezing October morning in the basement meeting room of the county administration building, surrounded by folding chairs and the smell of burnt concession coffee. I didn't attend in person. That was the entire point of the plan. Instead, I sent a junior associate from Sylvia's firm to bid on behalf of Timberline Assets LLC, with my absolute financial limit written on a card in his pocket. I sat in my car in the parking lot, my hands gripped tightly around my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother and sister were inside. I had watched them walk into the building, dressed up as if they were attending a high society gala, already celebrating their payday. Sylvia's associate sent me text updates every few minutes. Bidding opened low, exactly as I had calculated, because my mother had set the reserve price cheap to ensure a quick sale. Then the numbers began to climb. A local grower wanting the additional acreage, a developer from the city, and the quiet associate in the charcoal suit who simply nodded and raised his bidding paddle, patient as a Tuesday morning. The price climbed past 200,000, then past the 120,000. My mother and sister, I later learned, were ecstatic in the room. Every single bid meant more cash in their pockets, and they had absolutely no idea who was driving the price up or why. At 245,000, the room went completely silent. The auctioneer's gavel came down. The timber cottage and 10 acres on Ridgeview Lane officially belonged to Timberline Assets LLC. My phone buzzed. Sold to your LLC. Congratulations. Elena, I sat in my cold car, pressed my hand over my mouth, and let out a sound that was laugh, half sob. My mother walked out of the county building a few minutes later, beaming, clearly calculating figures in her head, complaining loudly to Vanessa about that aggressive investment company that had driven up the price. She passed within 30 feet of my parked car and never even looked over. She thought she had won. She thought she had sold her mother-in-law's home to a faceless corporate entity for top dollar. She had absolutely no idea she had just sold it right back to the granddaughter she swore was never in the will. The money moved quickly, the way money always does when people are desperate to get their hands on it. My mother took the largest share, and I would find out later that almost all of it went directly to paying off the secret second mortgage and the mountain of personal debt she had been hiding from my father for years. Vanessa immediately finalized the purchase of her luxury sports coupe and booked an expensive tropical vacation. My father accepted whatever share was handed to him, said nothing, and looked away. They divided the spoils of their fraud at a celebration dinner that I was not invited to, which suited me perfectly. Because every single dollar they were passing across that table was a dollar I had paid. I sat in my office above the bakery on the night the funds finally cleared, and I laid the newly recorded deed on my desk under the lamp. Timberline Assets LLC, owner of record, my company, my cottage, my grandmother's legacy safe and secure, and not a single soul in my family had any idea. I want to be completely honest with you about this part because it's the part people usually get wrong in stories. I did not feel triumphant that night. I felt incredibly tired. I felt sad. And I felt a profound, aching appreciation for the woman who had raised me, who had seen this entire disaster coming and armed me to fight it from beyond the grave. The triumph would come later. That night was just quiet. I traced the property description on the deed with my finger, thinking about the crooked porch swing and the wild blueberry bushes that had grown over with weeds. They were currently spending my money to celebrate cutting me out of the family. And I let them. I let every check clear, and I let every bottle of champagne be uncorked because December was approaching. And my mother, who could never resist an audience, was about to gather the entire family around her holiday table. I would be bringing a very specific hostess gift 3 sheets of paper. The invitation arrived in early December, and it actually surprised me. My mother called, her voice sweet as sugar, to invite me to Christmas dinner. It wasn't because she missed me. I knew her far too well for that. She invited me for 2 very specific reasons. The first was pure social theater. Nothing said, our family is completely fine. There are no hard feelings, like having the cast off bookkeeper daughter sitting peacefully at the holiday table. The second was sheer nerves. A rumor had begun circulating around town that a private legal firm had been asking quiet questions about the estate, requesting certified copies of the county probate records, and my mother wanted to look me in the eye to ensure I wasn't stirring a pot that might boil over on her. So she wrapped a leash in holiday tinsel and called it an invitation. "You'll come, won't you?" she coaxed. "It's the holidays. Let's put all of this behind us." Then, because she simply couldn't help herself, because casual cruelty was a reflex she had never bothered to curb, she added a little warning. "And let's not have any drama about the cottage, Elena. You know you were never in the will anyway. Don't go ruining everyone's holiday over it." I held the phone and looked out my office window at the holiday lights strung across Main Street. I thought about Sylvia's formal court petition, signed and ready to be filed the very first business day after the holidays. I thought about the deed in my desk drawer and the handwritten letter in my bag. And I thought, you have absolutely no idea what you are inviting into your dining room. "I'll be there," I said warmly. "What can I bring?" She told me just to bring myself. I told her I would bring myself, and I meant it. And I also meant the slim leather folder that would be tucked safely in my purse beside the holiday side dishes. I had promised to bring something to the table. I would be lying if I told you I didn't wrestle with the ethics of it. For a week, I went back and forth about how to handle the reveal, because how you win a fight matters just as much as whether you win. I could have done it quietly, behind closed doors. I could have let Sylvia's fraud lawsuit land on their doorstep in January with absolutely no warning, served by a professional process server, without ever saying a word at dinner. A part of me, the quiet, conflict-avoidant part of me, wanted that. It felt more dignified. But there was another hard truth I had to acknowledge. They had publicly humiliated me at the will reading, at the funeral reception, and at every family gathering for years. They had made me small in front of an audience, and they had done it intentionally, because an audience is what makes a lie stick. The smirk only works when people are watching. So, perhaps the truth deserved the exact same room the lies had used. I pulled out Ida's letter and read her words once more. Do not fight them with screaming. Let the paper speak. And there was my answer written in her familiar hand. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to throw wine, make a scene, or utter any of the angry retorts I had practiced in the shower. I was going to sit at that table, calm as a frozen pond, lay down 3 documents, and let them do all the talking. No insults, no shouting, just facts arranged in perfect order. The exact way I lay out a financial ledger that week. I signed the official authorization for Sylvia to file our petition to void the probate on the Monday after Christmas. The legal machinery was locked and loaded. The holiday dinner would simply be the moment my family learned the truth from me. Rather than from a court summons, I selected my outfit, a simple, dark green sweater that Ida would have called sensible. The thing about a shared lie is that it is only ever as strong as its most terrified participant. And Clint Hensley was getting terrified. I heard about it secondhand, and then I saw it with my own eyes. Word had reached him that an independent legal firm had requested the entire official estate file from the county registry, including the specific probate documents and the will he had notarized. To a crooked notary, that is the sound of a floorboard creaking in an empty house. Clint called my mother in an absolute panic. I know because I happened to stop by my parents' house to drop off a holiday winter jasmine pot 2 days before Christmas, and I caught her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low, sharp, and frantic. "Stop calling my house, Clint," she hissed. "Nobody is investigating anything. You did your job. You got paid. Now just act normal." A tense pause. "Because if you fall apart, Clint, you are taking all of us down with you, including yourself. So pull yourself together." She slammed the receiver down. I stood quietly in the hallway with my flower pot, wearing my most pleasant, harmless face, and filed that conversation away. So, Clint had been paid. She had said it herself, you got paid. A notary doesn't get a special, private fee for performing honest, standard work. The legal fee schedule is posted right on the wall. Clint had been paid to look the other way. The fraud wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was actively cracking from the inside out, and my mother was desperately trying to hold the walls up with threats. I drove home through the holiday lights, realizing that I might not even need to push very hard. People who build their lives out of lies spend all of their energy just bracing the walls. Sometimes, all the truth has to do is knock politely and wait. Just 2 more days. I could wait 2 days. In a tight-knit town like Hawthorne Glen, a historic property changing hands is major news, and people had started talking. At the grocery store, the hardware shop, and the post office, neighbors asked me subtle, probing questions. Who had bought the old Ross place? Was it going to be demolished by a developer? I kept my face entirely neutral and said I didn't know much, which felt deeply uncomfortable, lying by omission to neighbors who had loved Ida. But one specific moment cut right through me. I was in the hardware store downstairs from my office when old Mr. Henderson, who had farmed the land adjacent to my grandmother's property for 40 years, stopped me by the register. I heard whoever bought Ida's place intends to keep her heirloom blueberry patch, he said, his voice rough and weathered. Heard they're not clearing a single acre. Is that true? Someone at the local title company must have talked. I looked at his kind, worried face and I couldn't bring myself to lie to him. "It's true, Mr. Henderson," I said softly. "The blueberries stay." His eyes went bright, and he patted my arm with a heavy, calloused hand. "Good," he muttered. "She'd be glad. That woman loved those bushes more than most people love their own flesh and blood." He walked away, and I stood there blinking back tears. Because that was the heart of it, wasn't it? That was the entire reason I had emptied my savings, mortgaged my financial future, and built a company with a carefully chosen name, not to destroy my family and not even really to win. I bought that cottage to keep a promise, to keep her plants in the ground, her name on the land, and her porch swing creaking in the exact same crooked way it always had. The revenge, if you wanted to call it that, was merely a side effect. The real objective was much simpler. Somebody in this family was actually going to remember the woman, not just the money, and it was going to be me. The night before Christmas Eve, I sat at my kitchen table and prepared my leather folder. I have assembled legal and financial folders for clients hundreds of times, organizing documents so they tell a clear, undeniable story. I had never done it for myself before. I laid out the 3 pieces of paper. The first was a certified copy of the deed, showing Timberline Assets LLC as the sole owner of record of the cottage and 10 acres, dated the day of the auction. The second was the certified copy of my grandmother's real will, with Sylvia Sterling's official seal in the corner and my name in the body of the text. The cottage goes to my granddaughter Elena, the one who stayed. The third was Ida's personal letter, written in her own hand, instructing me to let the paper speak. I slid each page into the leather folder in the exact order I intended to reveal them. Deed first, to prove I owned the property. Will second, to prove it was always intended to be mine. Letter last, because the letter was the soul of the truth, and you always save the soul for the very end. I sat back and looked at the slim leather folder. 3 pages, 1 quiet sentence to go with them, already chosen and rehearsed until there was no tremble left in my voice. That was all it would take to turn my mother's victory dinner into the most devastating night of her life. I won't pretend my hand didn't hover over that folder for a long moment. Once I opened it at that table, there was no turning back, no returning to the quiet, compliant daughter who kept the peace. I would be the daughter who exposed the truth, and they would never forgive me for it. I closed the folder. I had made my peace with that price weeks ago. Some things are worth never being forgiven for. I went to bed, and to my own surprise, slept like a stone. On Christmas Eve, my father did something he had never once done in my entire life. He came to see me. I was closing up my accounting office for the holiday when I saw his old truck idling at the curb, its exhaust pluming in the freezing air. He walked up the wooden stairs slowly, holding his hat in his hands, and stood in my office doorway looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. "Your grandmother," he started, then trailed off. He cleared his throat and tried again. "There were estate papers I signed as part of the probate filing." He slowly turned the brim of his hat in his hands. I didn't read them closely. I should have read them closely. It was as close to an honest confession as Thomas Ross was capable of making. I waited in silence, because I had learned over the years that men, like my father, only speak the truth when you leave an empty space for them to fill. Clint put them in front of me. He finally whispered, "Your mother told me it was just a formality." I knew something wasn't right about the timing of it. I signed anyway. There it was. He knew. Maybe not every sordid detail, but he knew enough. He had known a crime was being committed, And he had chosen the easy, cowardly silence over protecting his own daughter, just as he had done his entire life. I felt the familiar old ache in my chest, but under it, I felt something far more solid. I didn't yell. I didn't offer him forgiveness either.
I know you did, Dad,
I said quietly. He flinched as if I had struck him, which was far more honest than any response. I could have screamed at him. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer, clearly hoping I would make it easier for him, hoping I would tell him it was all right. I didn't, because it wasn't. He nodded once, slowly put his hat back on, and walked down the stairs. I watched his taillights disappear down Main Street and thought, tomorrow, you will learn the rest of the story. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. On Christmas Day, I dressed in the simple green sweater, gathered my things, and drove across town to my parents' house. It's a short drive, Hawthorne Glen being the size that it is, maybe 10 minutes from my apartment above the bakery to their manicured ranch house on the affluent side of the school district. I made the drive I had made 1,000 times before, past the familiar holiday displays and lit up lawns, and I felt completely, unnaturally calm. The leather folder sat on the passenger seat beside my purse. I didn't rehearse my words on the way. I had done all the rehearsing I needed. Now, I just drove, watched the snow-dusted town slide past, and let the weight of what I was about to do settle into something unyielding. I thought about Ida teaching me to add up the tax columns out loud at her wooden table. Numbers don't lie, Elena. People do. I thought about how many years I had allowed my family to lie about me to my face, in front of others, and how I had quietly swallowed it just to maintain a peace that only ever protected them. That was officially over. I parked directly behind Vanessa's massive, brand-new luxury coupe and sat in the quiet car for one deep breath. Then I picked up my purse, felt the hard corner of the leather folder, and walked up the front path to the door, where I could already hear the sound of their laughter echoing inside. The dining room was warm, bright, and filled with the rich, comforting sense of the holidays. Roasted pine, cinnamon, and fresh herbs. My mother had outdone herself with the presentation. The good china was laid out, candles were lit, and a massive centerpiece of red and gold sat in the middle of the table. The entire cast of characters was present, my father sitting silently at the foot of the table, Vanessa and her husband, Julian. Near the middle, already enjoying their wine, my Uncle Gary and his wife, and to my quiet satisfaction, Clint Hensley. Sweating slightly in a holiday sweater, sitting near the end of the table like a man who wanted to be as close to the exit as possible. My mother presided at the head of the table, virtually glowing, refilling glasses, the undisputed queen of a kingdom she believed was completely secure. She greeted me with an enthusiastic hug that was entirely for show and seated me directly on her right, the place of honor, so the entire table could see how incredibly gracious she was being to the difficult daughter. I let her. I complimented the dinner, passed the serving bowls, asked Julian about his job, and admired the tree. By all accounts, I was a perfectly pleasant holiday guest. Inside, I was completely, utterly still. We ate, we toasted to the season, and then, right between the main course and the dessert, my mother tapped her crystal wine glass with her fork. She announced she had a little piece of family news worth celebrating. Here we go, I thought. Here we go. My mother stood up, her wine glass raised high, and the table went quiet for her, just as it always did. I just want to say, she began, her voice dripping with practiced emotion. What a difficult year it has been since we lost Mother Ross. but we got through it together as a family. And I am so happy to share that we finally closed the sale of her cottage last month. It's done, and we can all finally move forward. Glasses were raised around the table, and Vanessa called out, "Cheers, Mom!" Then, my mother's eyes slid down to me, and the familiar, mocking smirk appeared on her face. The one I had been waiting for, the one that required an audience to function. "I know the estate has been a bit of a sore spot for some," she said lightly, swirling her Chardonnay and looking directly at me. "But honestly, sweetheart, you were never in the will anyway. There's no shame in it. Grandma just knew who could handle things responsibly." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled around the table. Julian suddenly studied his plate, and my father went entirely rigid. The entire room waited to see if I would cry, argue, or quietly slink away the way I always had. I slowly set down my fork. I didn't reach for my purse just yet. I simply looked at my mother and let a heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch out. It was the kind of silence that makes confident people begin to second-guess themselves. Vanessa, who could never tolerate a silence she wasn't controlling, rushed to fill the void. She let out a bright, careless laugh and raised her glass toward me as if she were offering a toast of consolation. "Don't feel bad, Elena," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "Honestly, it's for the best. You would have just wasted it on that little office of yours anyway." There it was. The second knife, identical to the first. "You'd just waste it," said in front of the entire extended family on Christmas Day, delivered with a smile, as if it were a perfectly acceptable thing to say to your sister between dinner and dessert. Julian murmured, "Vanessa, come on." But she waved him off, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Clint Hensley reached for his water glass, missing it entirely on the first attempt. I sat there in the seat of honor on my mother's right hand and felt every single ounce of hesitation leave my body. They had said their piece, both of them, publicly and on the record, in front of every witness at that table. They had made their positions perfectly clear. I picked up my cloth napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate with slow, deliberate precision, the exact way Ida used to when she had decided a conversation was finished. Then, I reached for my wine. I took one slow, unhurried sip while the entire table watched me. I set the glass down and asked my mother a simple question in the exact same pleasant, conversational voice I had used to ask for the rolls. "Can I ask who you sold the cottage to?" She blinked, momentarily thrown off by how completely unfazed I was. "What?" "The cottage," I repeated calmly. "Who bought it?" She recovered quickly, because she absolutely loved telling this part of the story. "Some investment company," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Timberline Assets, I think. A real estate outfit. They actually bid us up beautifully, paid significantly more than we ever expected to get." She smiled around the table, basking in the silent admiration of her guests. "So really, the situation worked out wonderfully for everyone." "Timberline Assets, LLC," I repeated slowly, as if I were just confirming the name.
That's right,
she said, her brow furrowing slightly. "Why do you ask?" I felt the entire weight of that long, exhausting year arrive at this single, precise point. The funeral, the forged will, the freezing car in the county parking lot. All of it narrowing down to the next 60 seconds. The candles flickered, the dessert sat cooling, and 11 people waited, entirely unaware of what they were actually waiting for. I reached down into my purse, my hand closing around the cool leather folder, and I brought it up placing it flat on the table right beside my plate. I opened the folder and slid the first page out. "This is the deed to Grandma's cottage," I said, laying it flat in the center of the table, turned so my mother could read the text. Recorded the very afternoon of the auction. She glanced down, her expression impatient and annoyed. Then, her eyes caught on the listed owner's name, and she froze. Timberline Assets, LLC. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice suddenly losing its strength. I reached into the folder and pulled out the second page. "This is Grandma's will," I said. "Her real will, drafted 2 years ago by Sylvia Sterling, properly signed, witnessed, and notarized." I placed it directly beside the deed. "It leaves the timber cottage and the 10 acres to me, by name. It was never meant for anyone else." The remaining color drained from my mother's face, leaving her looking thoroughly hollowed out. Vanessa leaned in closer to read the document and went completely silent. Clint Hensley quietly pushed his chair back from the table. I pulled out the third and final page, holding it in my hands for a brief moment before setting it down, because this was the page that held her voice. "And this," I said, "is the personal letter she left for me, explaining exactly what the two of you would do the moment she was gone." The dining room went so silent, I could actually hear the candles crackling. Every single eye in the room moved from the documents to my mother, and then to me. I folded my hands on the edge of the table and let them look. My mother stared down at the 3 pages, and for the first time in her entire life, she had absolutely nothing to say. So I spoke for her, my voice as level and cool as a granite countertop. "So," I said quietly, "I truly hope you enjoyed spending the cash. Because I'm the one who bought it." The words landed softly, and then detonated slowly across the room. "Timberline Assets is my company." I explained. "I incorporated it and I funded the bid. The money you all spent so freely this fall, the mortgage payments, the luxury coupe, the vacation, that was my money. I bought Grandma's cottage back from your fraud. And not a single one of you even noticed." My mother's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. Then she finally found her voice. And it came out exactly as I knew it would, loud, desperate, and dripping with defensive fury. "That is an absolute lie," she shrieked, half rising from her chair, her hand catching her wine glass and sending it tipping across the white tablecloth, staining it dark red. "Clint, tell her!" "Tell her that will isn't real." But Clint Hensley was already on his feet, his face pale as ash, backing toward the hallway and muttering that he had to leave, that he had no part in any of this. I didn't raise my voice a single octave. I didn't have to. I simply placed my hand flat on Ida's letter and looked my mother directly in the eyes. "You said I was never in the will," I said. "And you were technically correct, because the will I was in, you replaced with a forgery. But I have the original. The candles burned. Nobody moved." The entire table fell into a deep, ringing silence, not the polite quiet of a dinner lull, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where every person has realized the truth at the exact same second, and no one wants to be the first to speak. Vanessa had gone the exact color of her linen napkin. I watched her do the mental math, watched the realization cross her face as she understood that the luxury coupe sitting in the driveway had been purchased with funds that the court was about to claw back. Money had never actually belonged to her. Her hand slowly drifted away from her wine glass. My father sat with his eyes tightly shut. My uncle stared down at his plate as if it might offer him an escape route. And I looked directly at my sister, who had laughed and claimed I would only waste it, and I gave her the only response that mattered. Turns out I didn't waste it. I said softly, I bought back the only thing in this entire family that was ever worth keeping. Somewhere in the kitchen, the oven timer began to beep for the second pie, cheerful, loud, and completely absurd. Nobody got up to turn it off. I didn't stay for dessert. I gathered my 3 documents back into their leather folder, thanked my mother for the dinner with a cold politeness that cut deeper than any insult could have, and drove home through the holiday lights with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel. The rest of the fallout happened exactly as Sylvia Sterling said it would, only much faster. A lie always crumbles rapidly once the foundation is exposed to the light. She filed our formal petition to void the probate on the very first business day after the holidays. We presented the certified original alongside clear evidence of the signature forgery, and the court took the matter incredibly seriously. Clint Hensley's notary commission was placed under immediate administrative review within weeks. Faced with the very real prospect of losing his professional license and facing criminal charges, he completely stopped pretending he had done anything legal, and his forged document collapsed under the first real judicial scrutiny. With the fraudulent will officially discredited, the court reopened the estate administration under Ida's real will, which left the cottage entirely to me. My purchase at the public auction stood on its own merit. I had purchased the property at arm's length, at fair market price, as an honest buyer, and a probate court will not claw back real estate from a good faith sale. What got completely unwound was the money. The cash my family had split came directly out of an estate they had emptied using a forged legal document, and the court ordered every single dollar of it returned to the estate accounts. My mother, who had already spent her entire share covering the debts she had hidden from my father, now owed it all back with absolutely no way to pay it. Her carefully constructed social image in Hawthorne Glen shattered publicly, which to her was the absolute worst punishment of all. Vanessa was forced to sell her brand, new luxury coupe, to scrape together her portion of the court-ordered repayment. My father moved into their spare guest bedroom, and last I heard, has been sleeping very poorly. I took absolutely no joy in their hardship. I want you to believe that. But I took no responsibility for their ruin either. I didn't forge any signatures. I didn't lie to anyone. And I didn't reach for a single dollar that wasn't legally mine. As for me, I kept the cottage both ways. It worked out exactly the way I had planned, and the way the law eventually decided. The public auction had made me the legal owner. The real will made me the rightful heir. 2 completely different roads, leading to the exact same front door. That spring, I drove out to Ridgeview Lane, repaired the crooked porch swing, and turned the damp soil in Ida's garden with my own hands. Mr. Henderson came by with some wild blueberry saplings, and we stood in the yard without saying much, which was its own kind of perfect blessing. I left the cottage door open for my father once, with one single non-negotiable condition: the door is open, I told him, whenever you are ready to be completely honest. He hasn't come down the driveway yet. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Either way, the blueberry garden is planted, and the porch swing creaks in the wind in the exact same crooked way it always had. Here is the most important thing I learned, sitting in that quiet timber house that used to belong to her. Your family can vote you out of their story all they want, but the people who actually stay are the ones who get to keep the house, the legacy, and the truth. That is where I will leave our story for tonight, the smirks, the holiday toast. and those 3 pieces of paper lying on the white tablecloth. If you have ever been the person who stayed while everyone else only showed up to collect the reward, then this story was written specifically for you. So do one quiet, important thing for yourself this week. Go check the legal paperwork on the things that actually matter to you. The deeds, the wills, and the promises. Quietly and early, long before you ever find yourself in a position where you have to raise your voice. Comment, the one who stayed, if you made it all the way to the end of this journey with me. Share this with someone in your life who needs to hear it, and make sure to subscribe to their secret stories, because there is always another family, another holiday table, and another hidden truth just waiting to be set down.